The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty auction yard in Millbrook, Texas. Jake Morrison adjusted his worn leather hat and surveyed the crowd gathering around the old, Victorian mansion that sat like a forgotten queen on the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the wraparound porch sagged in places, and weeds had claimed most of the front garden, but Jake saw something different. He saw potential. Jake had been working cattle ranches for 15 years, saving every penny he could scrape together. His calloused hands told the story of countless hours mending fences, breaking horses, and herding stubborn cattle across endless pastures. At 32, he was tired of living in the ranch bunkhouse, tired of having nothing to call his own except his horse, his truck, and the clothes on his back. The auction notice had caught his attention 3 weeks ago in the local newspaper. Victorian estate auction? No reserve? Those last 2 words had made his heart skip. No reserve meant the property would sell regardless of the final bid amount. Jake had done his research, walking the property boundaries, checking county records, and calculating what he could afford. His life savings amounted to exactly $1,047. As the crowd thickened, Jake noticed he stood out among the well-dressed real estate investors and local business owners. His faded jeans, scuffed boots, and simple plaid shirt marked him as what he was, a working cowboy with big dreams and shallow pockets. Some folks whispered and pointed, clearly amused that someone like him would even bother showing up. Near the front of the crowd, a sleek black sedan pulled up, drawing everyone's attention. The driver stepped out first, a tall man in an expensive suit, who immediately began scanning the crowd with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. From the passenger side emerged an elegant Chinese woman in her early 30s. Her long black hair pulled back in a sophisticated style that complemented her tailored business attire. Li Wei had built her fortune from nothing. Just like Jake, but their paths couldn't have been more different. She had arrived in America 10 years ago with a business degree, fierce determination, and exactly $200 to her name. Through careful investments, smart real estate deals, and an almost supernatural ability to spot undervalued properties, she had built a portfolio worth millions. The Victorian mansion represented more than just another investment to Li Wei. She had driven past this property countless times over the past 2 years, always slowing down to admire its bones. Despite its current state of disrepair, she could envision the stunning boutique hotel it could become. The location was perfect, close enough to downtown for convenience, but set back on enough acreage to provide privacy and tranquility. Li Wei had done extensive research on the property. She knew about the original owner, a railroad baron who had spared no expense when building the mansion in 1887. She knew about the imported Italian marble in the foyer, the hand-carved walnut staircase, and the original stained glass windows that still caught the light beautifully despite their age. Most importantly, she knew the property was worth at least $400,000 once properly restored. Her business partner, David Chun, had advised her to bid conservatively. "Don't get emotional about it," he had warned her that morning over coffee. "Set your limit and stick to it. There will always be other opportunities." But Li Wei had already made up her mind. This property was going to be hers, regardless of the cost. She had arranged for immediate financing up to $800,000. Confident that no one else in this small Texas town would be willing or able to match her resources, the auctioneer, a portly man named Bill Hendricks, who had been conducting estate sales in the area for over 20 years, climbed onto a makeshift platform. His assistant handed him a wireless microphone, and his booming voice carried across the yard. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's estate auction. We're here to sell this beautiful Victorian property, and let me remind you all that this is a no-reserve auction. That means we're selling today regardless of the final bid amount." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. No-reserve auctions were rare, especially for properties of this caliber. Bill continued his introduction, detailing the property's square footage, acreage, and major features. Li Wei listened carefully, taking notes on her phone while keeping an eye on the other serious bidders. "Now, before we begin," Bill announced, "I want to make sure everyone understands the terms. The winning bidder must provide a 10% deposit immediately following the auction. with the balance due at closing within 30 days. All sales are final, and the property is being sold as is. Jake felt his stomach tighten. 10% of even a modest winning bid would likely exceed his entire savings. He had hoped for a lower deposit requirement, but there was no backing out now. He had taken 2 days off work for this opportunity, and his foreman had made it clear that missing any more time might cost him his job. "Let's start the bidding at $50,000, Bill called out. Several hands went up immediately. Li Wei raised her bidding paddle with confidence, as did 2 real estate developers Jake recognized from previous auctions around town. The bidding moved quickly through the early rounds. 60,000, 75,000, 90,000. Jake remained silent, knowing that jumping in too early would only drive the price up faster. He watched Li Wei bid with the casual confidence of someone for whom money was merely a tool rather than a constant source of worry. Her paddle went up at 110,000, then again at 130,000. As the bidding approached $200,000. Several participants began dropping out. The crowd had thinned to just 5 serious bidders. Including Li Wei and Jake, the real estate developers were still in the game, along with a well-dressed couple who whispered intensely between bids. "Do I hear 225,000? Bill called out. Li Wei's paddle went up without hesitation. She was in her element now, the thrill of competition sharpening her focus. This was exactly the kind of situation where her careful preparation and financial resources gave her a decisive advantage. She glanced around at her remaining competition, mentally calculating how much higher each might be willing to go. At 250,000. One of the developers shook his head and stepped back from the group. The well-dressed couple lasted until 275,000 before they too withdrew, leaving just Li Wei, Jake, and one persistent developer named Marcus Thornton. Jake's heart was pounding. The bidding had far exceeded what he could afford, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. This felt like his one chance to own something meaningful, to build a foundation for the future he wanted. He thought about all the years of hard work, all the early mornings and late nights, all the dreams he had deferred while saving every possible penny. 300,000, Bill announced. "Do I hear 325,000? Li Wei raised her paddle again, her expression calm and controlled. She was well within her budget and could see that Marcus Thornton was starting to show signs of stress. His bids were coming more slowly now, accompanied by longer consultations with his assistant. Marcus made it to 350,000, before finally stepping back with a frustrated shake of his head. "Too rich for my blood," he muttered to his assistant, loud enough for others to hear. 350 going once, Bill called out, his eyes scanning the remaining crowd. "Do I hear 375? Li Wei smiled slightly. The property was essentially hers now. No one else had been bidding seriously for the past several rounds, and she was still well below her maximum budget. She had won, just as she had expected. That's when Jake Morrison stepped forward and raised his hand. 375, he called out in a clear, steady voice that carried across the suddenly quiet auction yard. Li Wei's head snapped around, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the cowboy who had just challenged her bid. She studied his worn clothes and weathered face, trying to assess whether he was serious or simply caught up in auction fever. Surely he couldn't afford to compete with her. "I have 375 from the gentleman in the cowboy hat," Bill announced, pointing toward Jake. "Do I hear 400,000? Li Wei raised her paddle immediately, her competitive instincts fully engaged. This cowboy was about to learn a very expensive lesson about trying to compete outside his league. 400,000 from the lady in front, Bill acknowledged. "Do I hear 425? Jake raised his hand again, his jaw set with determination. 425. A buzz of excitement ran through the crowd. This was turning into exactly the kind of dramatic showdown that made auctions memorable. Cell phones came out as people began recording the unexpected battle between the sophisticated businesswoman and the determined cowboy. Li Wei felt a flicker of annoyance. She had expected to wrap this up cleanly and efficiently, but now she was being forced into a prolonged bidding war with someone who clearly didn't understand the financial realities involved. She raised her paddle for 450,000. Jake countered immediately. 475. The bidding continued at this pace, each increment of $25,000 representing more money than Jake had ever possessed at one time. Li Wei kept expecting him to reach. The celebratory atmosphere around Jake Morrison lasted exactly 43 minutes. That's how long it took for the reality of his situation to cut through the adrenaline rush of winning the auction. As the crowd dispersed and the congratulations faded, Jake found himself standing alone with Bill Hendricks, the auctioneer, who was patiently waiting for the required 10% deposit. That'll be $80,000. Mr. Morrison, Bill said with a professional smile, pulling out his receipt book. Cash, certified check, or wire transfer? Jake's mouth went dry. $80,000. He had been so focused on winning the bidding war that the deposit requirement had somehow slipped from his immediate awareness. His entire life savings totaled just over $1,000, nowhere near enough to cover even this initial payment. I need to make a phone call, Jake managed, his voice barely audible above the sound of cars, starting up as people headed home from the auction. Bill's smile faltered slightly. In 20 years of conducting auctions, he had seen this scenario before. Bidders caught up in the excitement who committed to purchases they couldn't actually complete. Mr. Morrison, I need to inform you that failure to provide the deposit within 30 minutes will result in the property being offered to the second highest bidder. Li Wei, who had been walking toward her sedan, stopped in her tracks when she heard this exchange. She turned slowly, a look of dawning realization spreading across her face. The cowboy who had just humiliated her in front of the entire town might not actually be able to complete the purchase. She watched with growing interest as Jake pulled out a battered cell phone and began making increasingly desperate calls. His voice carried across the now nearly empty auction yard as he spoke to what sounded like family members and friends, each conversation ending with the same result, polite sympathy but no financial assistance. Maria, I know it's a lot to ask, Jake said into his phone, his desperation becoming more apparent with each word. But this could change everything for us. I could finally have something to offer you, something real. Li Wei moved closer, not bothering to hide her eavesdropping. She learned that Maria was apparently Jake's longtime girlfriend, a nurse at the county hospital who had been patiently waiting for him to establish some financial stability before they could seriously discuss marriage. The conversation ended with Maria explaining, through what sounded like tears, that she had less than $3,000 in her savings account. 25 minutes had passed when Jake finally lowered his phone and approached Bill Hendricks with the look of a man about to confess to a crime. Mr. Hendricks, I need to be honest with you. I don't have the deposit money available right now, but I can get it. I just need a little more time. Bill shook his head sympathetically. I'm sorry, son, but the terms are clear. I have to offer the property to the second highest bidder. He turned toward Li Wei, who had positioned herself within earshot. Ma'am, are you still interested in the property at your final bid of $775,000? Li Wei felt a surge of vindication mixed with something else, something that felt disturbingly like pity as she watched the defeat wash over Jake Morrison's face. She had won after all, and at a price $25,000 lower than what the cowboy had bid. Yes, she said firmly, pulling out her phone. I can wire the deposit immediately. As Li Wei began making arrangements for the electronic transfer, Jake stood frozen nearby. The property he had fought so hard to win was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Worse, he was about to be publicly exposed as someone who had bid far beyond his means. A cautionary tale that would be told around Millbrook for years to come. That's when something unexpected happened. Li Wei finished her phone call and walked directly over to Jake, her expression unreadable. For a long moment they stared at each other, the successful businesswoman and the defeated cowboy. You have excellent taste in real estate, Li Wei said finally, her voice neutral. This property has tremendous potential. Jake nodded miserably. Yes, ma'am, it does. I could see what it could become, even with all the work it needs. What did you plan to do with it? Li Wei asked, genuine curiosity creeping into her voice. Jake looked up, surprised by the question. For a moment, his face lit up as he began describing his vision. I was going to restore it, bring it back to its original beauty. Maybe run a small guest ranch, give city folks a taste of country life. The land is perfect for horses, and the house, well, the house could be magnificent again. Li Wei found herself listening intently. Jake's vision wasn't that different from her own plans for a boutique hotel, and his enthusiasm was infectious. More importantly, she could see that his love for the property was genuine, not just financial calculation. You know a lot about restoration? She asked. Jake nodded eagerly. I've been studying it for months, learning about Victorian architecture, researching contractors and materials. I've even got detailed plans drawn up for the renovation timeline. Show me, Li Wei said impulsively. Jake looked confused. Ma'am? Show me your plans. I'm serious. Jake hurried to his truck and returned with a worn folder containing hand-drawn sketches, contractor estimates, and detailed renovation schedules. Li Wei studied them carefully, impressed, despite herself, by the thoroughness of his preparation. His plans showed a deep understanding of both the property's potential and the practical challenges involved in bringing that potential to life. These are quite detailed, Li Wei admitted. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this. It's been my dream for 3 years, Jake said quietly. Ever since I first saw this place, I knew it was meant to be restored, not torn down for development. Bill Hendricks cleared his throat. Ma'am, I hate to interrupt, but I need to complete this transaction. The deposit? Li Wei held up a finger. Just one moment. She turned back to Jake, an idea forming in her mind. Mr. Morrison, what if I told you there might be another way for you to get your hands on this property? Jake's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean a partnership. You clearly have the vision and the passion for this restoration. What you lack is capital. I have capital, but I lack your specific knowledge of the property and the local area. Jake stared at her, not quite believing what he was hearing. You're talking about some kind of business arrangement? I'm talking about a 50-50 partnership, Li Wei said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. You handle the day-to-day restoration management, I provide the financing. We split ownership and eventual profits equally. Bill Hendricks looked back and forth between them with barely concealed amusement. Ladies and gentlemen, in all my years of auctioneering, I've never seen anything quite like this. Jake was speechless. The woman who had been his bitter rival just minutes ago was now offering him exactly what he had dreamed of, ownership of the Victorian mansion and the resources to restore it properly. Why? He finally managed to ask, Why would you want to partner with me? Li Wei considered the question carefully. Because in business, passion is just as valuable as money. You can't buy the kind of dedication I saw in your eyes during that auction. I've worked with plenty of contractors and project managers, but I've never seen someone who cares about a property the way you obviously care about this one. But you don't even know me, Jake protested. For all you know, I could be completely unreliable. Li Wei smiled for the first time since the auction began. Mr. Morrison, you just bid $800,000 on a property with only $1,000 in your bank account. That tells me everything I need to know about your commitment level? Jake laughed despite himself, the absurdity of the situation finally hitting him. When you put it that way, I guess I am pretty committed. So what do you say? Li Wei extended her hand. Partners? Jake looked at her outstretched hand, then back at the Victorian mansion that had captured his imagination years ago. This wasn't how he had envisioned acquiring the property, but it was an opportunity he would be foolish to refuse. Partners, he agreed. Shaking her hand firmly, Bill Hendricks grinned and pulled out a fresh set of paperwork. Well, this is a first for me, but if you're both agreeable to joint ownership, I can certainly accommodate that arrangement. As Li Wei arranged for the deposit wire transfer, Jake found himself studying his new partner with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. An hour ago, she had been his fierce competitor. Now she was offering him the chance to achieve his dreams. I have to ask, Jake said as they waited for the wire transfer to clear. "What made you change your mind about working with me?" Li Wei considered the question while watching the sun set behind the Victorian mansion's ornate silhouette. "Honestly, I think it was when you described your vision for the property. I've been in real estate for 10 years, and most people see buildings as investments or commodities. You see this place as something that deserves to be saved and cherished. That's rare. Also," she added with a slight smile, "you managed to outbid me for 20 minutes straight. Anyone who can push Li Wei to her financial limit deserves a certain amount of respect." Jake grinned. "Well, when you put it that way, ... The wire transfer cleared 37 minutes later, officially making Jake Morrison and Li Wei joint owners of the 1887 Victorian mansion and its surrounding 15 acres. As 6 months after the auction, the Victorian mansion buzzed with activity that it hadn't seen in over 3 decades. Workers moved purposefully through the rooms, restoring original hardwood floors, carefully cleaning the stained glass windows, and painstakingly repairing the hand-carved woodwork that had made the house famous throughout the county. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he supervised the installation of a new electrical system in the mansion's east wing. His partnership with Li Wei had exceeded both their expectations, transforming what could have been a contentious business relationship into something approaching genuine friendship. "The original wiring was even worse than we thought," Jake called out to Li Wei, who was consulting with the plasterer about restoring the dining room's ornate ceiling. "But the good news is we found another set of original light fixtures in the basement. They're tarnished, but they'll be beautiful once we get them cleaned up." Li Wei nodded approvingly. Over the past months, she had developed deep respect for Jake's attention to detail and his ability to uncover hidden treasures throughout the property. His knowledge of Victorian architecture had proven invaluable, saving them thousands of dollars in consultant fees while ensuring that every renovation decision honored the mansion's historical integrity. "The plasterer thinks he can have the ceiling work finished by Friday," Li Wei reported. "That puts us exactly on schedule for the grand opening." Their partnership had evolved naturally into clearly defined roles. Li Wei handled the business side, permits, financing, insurance, and marketing, while Jake managed the physical restoration and coordinated with contractors. They met every morning at 7 to review progress and make decisions, and these meetings had gradually extended into longer conversations about their backgrounds, dreams, and philosophies. Li Wei had been particularly impressed by Jake's relationship with the local contractors and craftsmen. His years of ranch work had given him credibility with the working men, who might have been skeptical of orders from a big city investor. When Jake Morrison endorsed a plan or technique, people listened and worked harder to meet his standards. "I never expected to enjoy this as much as I do," Li Wei admitted as they walked through the newly restored main hallway. "I've bought and sold dozens of properties, but I've never been this involved in the actual renovation process." Jake smiled, running his hand along the newly refinished banister. "It shows in the results. This place has soul again, not just function." Their success had attracted attention throughout the region. The local newspaper had featured their story on the front page, under the headline, "Unlikely. Partners bring historic mansion back to life." The article had generated inquiries from potential guests even before they officially opened for business, but success had also brought unexpected complications. As word spread about the mansion's transformation, Li Wei began receiving calls from her former business associates in Dallas and Houston. Her partners in previous deals were curious about this new venture and, more specifically, about her relationship with her Cowboy partner. "Li Wei, darling," her former mentor, Patricia Huang, had said during a recent phone call, "surely you're not planning to tie yourself to this little town permanently. You have so much more potential than running a bed and breakfast with some ranch hand." These conversations frustrated Li Wei more than she cared to admit. Her colleagues seemed incapable of understanding that she had found something in Millbrook that all her previous business successes had failed to provide a sense of genuine accomplishment and belonging. Jake faced his own challenges from people who couldn't understand his new situation. Some of his old ranching buddies viewed his partnership with Leeway with suspicion, particularly when they learned that she retained equal control over all business decisions. "You sure you know what you're doing, Jake?" his friend Tommy had asked during a recent visit to the property. "She's got you working harder than any boss you ever had. And at the end of the day, she can still outvote you on anything that matters." These comments stung because they contained a grain of truth. Jake had discovered that being an equal partner meant constant negotiation and compromise in ways that his previous life as a ranch employee had never required. Every significant decision had to be discussed and agreed upon. From paint colors to marketing strategies to staffing decisions, the real test of their partnership came during the third month of renovation when they discovered that the mansion's foundation needed far more extensive work than originally anticipated. The repair costs would add nearly $50,000 to their budget, money that Leeway would have to provide since Jake had no additional resources to contribute. "I don't like the optics of this," Jake had said when the contractor delivered the bad news. "You're already carrying the financial load for this partnership. If you have to put in even more money, it doesn't feel like we're really equal partners anymore." Leeway had surprised him with her response. "Jake, partnership isn't about contributing identical resources. It's about contributing whatever you have that makes the venture successful. Your knowledge and dedication are worth just as much as my money." But Jake's concerns proved prophetic when Leeway's business attorney arrived from Dallas to review the partnership agreement in light of the additional investment. David Chun had been skeptical of the arrangement from the beginning, and the foundation crisis gave him an opportunity to express his reservations directly. "Leeway, I have to advise you that this partnership structure is becoming increasingly lopsided," David said during a tense meeting in the mansion's library. "You've now invested over $600,000 while your partner has contributed essentially no capital. From a legal standpoint, you'd be better served by restructuring this as an employer-employee relationship." Jake had listened to this conversation with growing discomfort, realizing that David was voicing concerns that Leeway might share but had been too polite to express. The suggestion that he become Leeway's employee rather than her partner felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together. "David, I appreciate your legal expertise," Leeway had replied carefully. "But Jake and I agreed to this partnership structure for good reasons. Those reasons haven't changed, but the seed of doubt had been planted." Over the following weeks, Jake found himself second-guessing his contributions to the partnership and wondering if Leeway secretly resented having to carry the financial burden alone. Their morning meetings became more formal and businesslike. Losing some of the easy camaraderie they had developed, the tension finally came to a head. 3 weeks before their planned grand opening, Leeway had scheduled a meeting with a potential corporate client who was interested in booking the mansion for executive retreats. The client, a senior vice president from a major Dallas corporation, arrived expecting to deal with the property owner, and was clearly confused when introduced to Jake as an equal partner. "I'm sorry," the executive had said after Jake had spent 20 minutes explaining their vision for the property, "but I prefer to negotiate directly with the decision-maker. Could I speak with Ms. Lee privately?" Leeway had immediately corrected the assumption. "Mr. Morrison is my partner and co-owner. Any agreement we make will require both our signatures." But the damage was done. Jake could see the executive's skepticism and Leeway's embarrassment at having to explain their arrangement. The meeting ended without a booking, and Jake was convinced that his presence had cost them a significant opportunity. That evening, Jake made a decision that had been building in his mind for weeks. He found Leeway in the mansion's kitchen, reviewing catering proposals for their opening event. "Leeway, we need to talk," he said. His voice heavy with resignation. She looked up from her paperwork, immediately sensing the gravity in his tone. "What's wrong?" Jake sat down across from her at the newly refinished kitchen table. "I've been thinking about David's suggestion about restructuring our arrangement. Maybe he's right. Maybe it would be better for both of us if I became your employee rather than your partner. Li Wei's face went white. Jake, no. That's not what I want. But it makes sense, Jake continued, his words coming faster now. You've put up all the money, you're taking all the financial risk. I'm essentially working for you anyway. At least if we make it official, you won't have to keep pretending we're equals when we're clearly not. Li Wei stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the restored hardwood floor. Is that what you think this has been? Pretending? I think you've been incredibly generous and patient with me, Jake replied. But I also think we both know that this partnership only works because you're willing to overlook the fact that I bring nothing to the table except labor and enthusiasm. Nothing to the table? Li Wei's voice rose with indignation. Jake, without you, this would be just another generic renovation project. You're the one who found the original light fixtures, who convinced the Historical Society to support our application for landmark status, who designed the guest experience that makes this place special rather than just expensive. That's not the same as financial contribution, Jake said quietly. Li Wei stared at him for a long moment, her anger gradually giving way to something that looked like hurt. I can't believe you're saying this. After everything we've